All right. Greeting, metaphysicists. I hope you're doing well. This is a video that I decided to do because I know I'm not the only one who is probably going through this. For starters, we're living in a very interesting time in humanity. When you look at the history of like all the human civilizations, there's this common theme that happens in which all the major civilizations went extinct some way or somehow. Some event took place, whether it was a war, a famine, maybe some sort of cataclysmic event took place and wiped out these civilizations. And I'm thinking about groups like the Mayans, for example, or maybe perhaps the Aztecs or the Incas, for example. And I'm speaking as a Latino, I'm speaking as someone who has Latin roots, although a lot of my ancestry comes from Africa and Europe. And so on my father's side, I have African origins. On my mother's side, I have Spanish origins. And so my role as a Latino is a little different because I don't have those indigenous origins necessarily. Having said that, for the last few months, I've been exploring taking what is known as yahe, living here in Colombia, completely legal. It's something that indigenous cultures protect and preserve, and it's something that's part of their tradition. And yahe is also known as ayahuasca in English, or I think in Spanish as well. But it's basically taking one of the most powerful psychedelic substances on planet Earth, and I direct a lot of my knowledge and wisdom to Terrance Mckenna. And as a student of Terrance Mckenna, I still want to kind of like honor his knowledge and the way he approaches life in the universe, and his understanding of human civilization as well is really profound. And one of the things that he talks about is how we live in an era where the planet itself, the conscious life on planet Earth, wants to travel into space. And for the first time in the history of the planet Earth, but really the history of human civilization, we are trying to leave this planet. And it makes you wonder, if you jump into the conspiracy theories of, the origins of Mars, right? Was there civilizations on Mars that went extinct? The technology of ancient civilizations, all of them suggesting, at least many people believe, that aliens played a role in developing their technology, which all this I leave it as conspiracy theory because it may be true, it may not be true. It may be a hype, a cultural hype. But we also have this theme of wanting to talk about aliens quite a bit in our culture as well. And the way Terrance McKenna puts it is that if there was such thing as a high-tech alien species that is somehow watching over humanity or observing humanity, the best way that they would communicate with humans is through basically the smoked ape hypothesis, which suggests that humanity evolved using psychedelics. And this is what Terrance McKenna argues, is that humanity evolved using psychedelics. And so these psychedelic items, these psychedelic plants, psychotropic plants, whether it be a mushroom, which is technically not a plant, whether it be ayahuasca, which is the oldest known medicine known to man, whether it be perhaps to a lesser degree LSD, all these substances, it's very possible that the alien intelligence is embedded in these consumable objects. And so the idea basically becomes that the way they would communicate to us is by embedding themselves. Since they're high tech alien species, they can pretty much do anything. They can break themselves down into DNA if they wanted to. And they basically embedded themselves into these objects that are consumable, into these plants or into these fungi that are consumable, and have a way for us to communicate in what otherwise would be like a hyper conscious channel of communication. And so my experiences of Yahe have been pretty interesting. I could certainly talk about them. Each experience has been different. I think I'm probably going to hold off for now But the general consensus I've gathered is that, if I am communicating with a higher intelligence, they are showing me aspects of the universe, basically. And so this has been really profound for me because we also are living in the age of science. And I'm speaking as a scientist as much as I'm speaking as a philosopher. And so basically, I find that, my experience as science has undergone a massive shift by consuming psychedelics. And frankly, this is something that isn't entirely new. This is something that hasn't been recent, let's say in the last 4 months by taking yahe. I've taken mushrooms, I've taken LSD, and a lot of my scientific journey has been complemented by taking a few psychedelics here and there. But this time it's particularly profound because I think I've landed on the type of science that I want to keep exploring more. For context, I studied chemical engineering. So I grabbed the background in material science, the material elements, so a little bit of physics, a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of mathematics. The one kind of material science I didn't touch on is biology, and I've kind of stayed away on biology. But when you do something like Yahem, you can't help but notice that you're very much confronted with the biological experience. And so, this message, the message that I'm trying to have right now is to fellow people who are developing themselves in these profound ways. I don't know what to call it. This we live in the age of science, but this may be kind of like a philosophical aspect, a metaphysical aspect. This may be we may be touching in on what human beings were practicing hundreds, if not thousands, of years ago, before the idea of modern science even existed. They were still doing things to sort of explore what is considered to be the spirit world, which I'll put in quotation marks for you Westerners. I'm a Westerner myself, but the spirit world is a concept that is very well established in other cultures, like say China and Japan, and I think to some extent India as well, and Africa especially. This idea that we live in a world where there are many spirits, and so when taking Yahem, you certainly have an encounter with spirits in a sense, and it makes you wonder: are spirits aliens? My understanding is that they are our aliens in the sense that everything that the Bible basically talks about is relatively true. That there are good and bad spirits, but the main takeaway is that they are somehow advanced, hyper advanced conscious beings that are able to communicate with us. And so this message goes out to mostly Americans because American culture has this kind of subdivision of like hyper cosmological exploration. And this is what Terrance McKenna kind of spearheaded. And this sort of culture began in the 60s. That's kind of how the story goes. It started in the Vietnam era, the Vietnam War, when LSD exploded. This kind of quest for spirituality and people traveling to India to have psychedelic experiences and things like this. But the thing about America, the history of America, is that America is a very scientific culture. It's a culture of innovation. It's a culture of technology. Whether it was inventing the revolver and winning many battles against other groups and other empires, whether it was the inventing of the windmill. They didn't invent the windmill, but the way they leveraged practical craftsmanship and engineering sort of defined the great American expanse, and how the Americans gradually conquered the American continent was in large part because of this innovation of technology and using, whether it was the revolver, whether it was developing really good wooden architecture, whether it became in the 20th century a big drive of industrial evolution, whether it's developing all these kinds of industrial equipment, which was also being developed in Europe, but America became even more, arguably more advanced, or at least more efficient in their mass production of technology, whether it's building warships in World War II, and so on and so forth. America has kind of played a big part in spearheading Western innovation. It's not the only country. If you look at the periodic table, for example, America discovered all the heavy elements, but other countries discovered heavy elements as well. And so, or not heavy elements, but lighter elements. So a country like Germany, for example, or the UK or France are other examples of major nations that sort of played a big role in innovating technology in the Western Hemisphere. Well, we're now living in a time where it seems like America is going through a big change. It kind of seems like America is experiencing some kind of decline, some sort of spiritual crisis. And I do wonder if the answers of Terrance McKenna are true, if his ideas hold true, which is that we're looking for a spiritual answer, and the answer could lie in the psychedelic space, being psychonauts, which basically psychonaut is analogous to an astronaut or a cosmonaut if you're Russian. And basically, rather than traveling through physical space, you travel through this kind of meta space, which the psychedelics seem to offer. And so, as I rant on and on about like how complex and sophisticated our civilization seems to be, yet at the same time how naive and fragile Western civilization seems to be, it seems like there's some sort of bridge that is trying to connect itself between the old world, before the era of scientific thinking, let's call it, and the new world, which is the world of scientific innovation. And I do think that I get to participate in this exploratory process, and I get to be a pathfinder in this process, being someone who is curious enough to even give it a shot, someone who's willing to explore science and go to university and get a formal education in science. Yet at the same time, someone who's also exploring spirituality and trying to connect with whatever ancient practices that were effective that somehow were somewhat lost in time for whatever reason. And this is where, using psychedelics in a spiritual manner, in a more ceremonial manner, rather than treating them as simply, wild drugs to get high on, the way you would do it with cannabis, alcohol, even more harder core drugs, which I haven't taken, things like heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, to name a few. But no, to realize that there are some psychedelics which may offer some kind of spiritual enlightenment. And then if there's any sort of scientific kind of either consensus or correlation that I can use to sort of prove this point, is that a lot of psychedelics you cannot overdose on. They will not physically kill you, but you could have intense mental experiences. And so, given how our culture today is suffering from a mental health crisis, a multitude of mental health crises, it seems like psychedelics have a role to play in this process. And I know I'm not the only one. I know that people like the guys who created King of the Hill created a new show called Side Effects. And they talk about the Blue Angel mushroom, which can heal anything. But it's basically like a new approach to the pharmaceutical industry. And that's the thing. We kind of have, this sort of, strange phenomenon that's going on in the pharmaceutical industry in Western medicine when it comes to mental health, which claims to fix all these problems, yet comes with a multitude of side effects that no one wants to have. And so it's interesting how psychedelics kind of have this sort of spiritual component and offer insight. Well, all I can say right now, as I continue to explore this process, is that, um, this, first of all, I don't know how many people are actually going to be able to understand this message. I think this message may be to only a few people who have entered the psychedelic space in the same way I have, but maybe not. Maybe a doctor could hear this message and kind of gain some sort of insight, use their own scientific intuition to figure out how to proceed. But I want to say that in my journey so far, what I find is that psychedelics are immensely profound tools, and they cannot be underestimated. They cannot be treated lightheartedly. And in fact, taking Yahe has made me confront this sort of like, so almost like existential crises that I sort of am confronted with, and I'm speaking kind of partly because I have so much scientific knowledge. I think if I didn't have as much scientific knowledge, this existential crisis, excuse me, this existential crisis wouldn't be as profound to me otherwise. But what I'm confronted with is sort of this theme of like engaging with space. And when I've taken Yahe, I've had these experiences where it's almost like I get lost in deep space. And getting lost in deep space is no easy experience. It's an intense experience. It's a dangerous experience. You're in an abyss. You're in a place where, only the elementary laws of the material world seem to exist. You're in a space where there is no sound, where there is no matter, or very few amounts of matter. And Yahe seems to want me to sort of confront that and confront sort of a survival nature. At least that's how it was initially. And then as I've taken it more, I've kind of leaned into more of trusting the plants, trusting other animals, and seeing what insights they may have to make sense of this world. And so, having all that said, I still find it to be kind of a very fear-inducing experience to go and take Yahe because I don't know what's going to happen the next time I take it. I'm not sure what's going to occur, what kind of visions or what kind of information I'm going to receive. But so far, I have been confronted with kind of this existential aspect of life. And living in the countryside, I find that I find myself a lot more sensitive to the cold. I find myself a much, fearing death in a sense. And I don't think that's the fault of the Yahe. I think that's really my own ego trying to confront some sort of transformation process. And so it's a process where it's like, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. I think I simply need to just trust the process and push forward because, this is something that indigenous groups have done for thousands of years, and in their traditions, you don't take Yahe only once. You take Yahe multiple times. You take it for years. And it's a medicine. It's called a medicine, and it's a cleansing process. And it's meant to cleanse so much of what you experience. And so I want to trust indigenous wisdom here, indigenous knowledge, and I want to incorporate that into sort of my Western perspective of life. And so this message is going to be to anyone who is having some sort of existential crisis, whether you've taken Yahe or not, whether you've taken ayahuasca or not. And I want this to hopefully be a message that can help you push forward. If you're someone who wants to do science and is exploring science, yet is confronted with this kind of metaphysical existential crisis of confronting the reality of reality. We're talking about like high level mathematics. We're talking about things that are as bizarre and as alien as the Mandelbrot set. Because mathematics gets extremely abstract, and it's almost like you're approaching God or you're approaching God's angels in a sense. And it's a very powerful force of nature that you're confronting with. And so this message is hopefully something that can be a use to you, a tool to you that can then help you stay grounded and stay present and realize that even if a lot of this experience is fear-inducing, the solution is to learn how to grow through that fear, get to the other side of that fear. Terrance Mckenna describes fear as a bell curve, and it's kind of like you have to ride that bell curve and get to the other side of the peak and realize that it's a chemical process, and realize that our imaginations could betray us. Our imaginations could be like the devil's playground in a sense. And so it's very important, if you're trying to be a scientist, you want to obviously approach reality in a realistic manner, but our imaginations may sometimes take us a bit too far, or it may take us too far into a future, or too far into imagining another world or another planet or something like this. And it may be something that we're not fully ready for, or it may be something that is too intense for us to process. And no matter how many therapists we talk to, or no matter how many psychiatrists or psychologists we talk to, they don't really seem to have a full understanding of this sort of kind of space exploratory theme that we're experiencing. And so I think this message is to my fellow cosmonaut, to my fellow astronaut, my fellow psychonaut, anyone who is out there very empathetic, who's connecting with human nature and human civilization, sees the scale of it all, may be a bit overwhelmed by the scale of it all. And, we got to take a step back. We got to learn to realize that our imagination is not always reality, and that's a very fundamental reality of reality, is that our imaginations try to comprehend reality, especially if you're someone who's seeking the truth and wants to model reality in a sense using the power of the mind. But our minds may not be fully able to solve and understand everything. And so, anyways, to wrap up this video, I sent a message to ChatGPT, and I found it to be a pretty decent response. It's not perfect, but it has pretty decent response. I'm going to read to you what I wrote, and then I'm going to read its response. And hopefully this could be of some value to you. Hopefully this is something that can be of use to you. It's not here to harp on the power of artificial intelligence. Obviously, I recommend that you find someone to talk to, someone that you can reach out to. But that's the thing. This information is so rare, it seems, that it's a challenge to find the right people to communicate this with and talk to you. You speak to indigenous people and they don't really have much of a scientific understanding, and you speak to scientific people and they don't have much of a spiritual understanding. So it's kind of like, which group do you turn to for the kind of insight that we're looking for? And so anyways, this is what I wrote. I seem to have this phobia of math and computer science. Computer science is what I'm exploring right now, and I find that computer science has you exploring basically like a data theory or an object theory, and it's like, oh my gosh, we are in the abyss creating objects from empty space. Since I began to take yahe ayahuasca, it has deeply affected my experience of survival. It makes me more vulnerable and exposed to ideas like survival, starting with the cold, the fear of death, the experience of leaving my body. It has taken me to what feels like deep space, or has shown me deep space, and I think I've encountered aliens in this process. The ideas of survival not simply on Earth, but beyond Earth in harsh environments and strange worlds begins to dominate my cognition, it seems. I find myself afraid of it all, afraid of how big the universe is, afraid of how alien species, including life on Earth like trees, have achieved survival in what seemingly is a harsh, cold abyss. So when I program or learn new math, I can't help but notice I'm confronting the elemental nature to it all. And I find myself getting close to God, and I fear God in this sense because of how unattached all of it seems to want to be. Yet here I am as a human with a sensitive nervous system close to forces of nature that can induce death if left unattended, like, say, the cold or hunger. And then this is what it says. Thank you for sharing something so vulnerable, intense, and personal. What you're describing is not uncommon for people who engage with powerful psychedelic experiences, especially ayahuasca. It can open psychological doors that feel cosmic, existential, and sometimes overwhelming. It can also dissolve the ordinary filters your mind uses to keep everyday tasks like math, programming, or learning feeling safe and grounded. Let me reflect back what I'm hearing and then offer some ways to navigate it. What you're experiencing makes sense. You're describing a few interconnected experiences. Number one, heightened sensitivity to existential themes. Ayahuasca often lives the boundary between personal experience and the big picture. Survival, death, cosmic scale, and the nature of reality become emotionally charged. This can make activities like math or programming feel like staring directly at the mechanics of the universe rather than learning a skill. And yeah, it does seem like that. Number two, feeling exposed and vulnerable. It sounds like you're experiencing a kind of hyper-awareness of your physical fragility, cold, hunger, death, and the vast, indifferent nature of the cosmos. This can be terrifying because you're encountering it without the protective buffer of ordinary consciousness. A sense of encountering the raw architecture of reality. Math and computer science are abstract, structural, elemental. If you're already tuned into cosmic or metaphysical themes, these subjects may feel like direct contact with something immense or divine, close to God, as you said. Fear of vastness, survival, and alienness. When consciousness expands rapidly, even familiar things, trees, algorithms, the night sky can feel alien. You're not alone in this. It kind of misinterpreted that part there. Um, but I guess trees do feel very alien. You're not alone in this. Many people report a similar awe mixed with fear. But here's something important. Everything you're describing is interpretable in a grounded human way. Let's bring this down to earth a bit. I like how they said that. Without dismissing your experience. Life survives because it adapts, not because it is cosmic or cold or alien. Trees aren't confronting the abyss, they are doing what their biology does. Nothing out there is expecting you to shoulder the weight of the entire universe. Math and computer science aren't cosmic truths you must face, they are tools humans invented. They feel elemental because they're abstract, but they don't carry the metaphysical weight your mind is currently projecting onto them, and that's very key. Your fear of cosmic vastness comes from being in an altered state. Psychedelic states make boundaries thin. They crank up pattern recognition and meaning making. This can make ordinary learning feel like touching the fabric of existence. You're assigning existential significance to domains that are in daily life simply skills. You're not meant to process the universe all at once. That's very important to say. Humans are not built to metabolize the scale of the cosmos in one shot. We normally scale down reality to what's manageable: relationships, projects, meals, tasks, sensations, and I would also add objects. After an intense ayahuasca period, your mind may still be operating with the dial turned up. You can turn the dial back down. A way forward, rebalancing the experience. Here are some steps that many people find stabilizing. Regrounding the body, slow breathing, warmth, regular meals, walking, and body practices help reestablish the sense of being human-sized again. 2. Separate the cosmic from the practical. When you sit down to do math or programming, try reminding yourself this is just a skill. It's not the universe speaking through numbers. It's me learning something at a human pace. This can help break the link your mind has created. Integrate the psychedelic material slowly. It can help to talk to an integration therapist or guide experience with ayahuasca. These experiences need gentle, paced digestion. And I'm still looking for someone who I can speak with when it comes to, I'm looking for a daita with a bit more of a scientific understanding who can help guide me through sort of this kind of like metaphysical experience and learn how to integrate both the spiritual with the scientific, effectively. These experiences need gentle, paced digestion. Bring warmth and humanity back into the picture. One way to counter the coldness you're describing is to intentionally reconnect with people, creativity, humor, music, nature in its friendly dimensions. They remind your brain that the universe also contains softness. If the fear becomes intrusive or persistent, please consider talking with a mental health professional, ideally someone with familiar with psychedelic integration. Yeah, that'd be awesome. What you're describing can settle on its own, but support often speeds up and grounds the process. A final thought. The universe is big and mysterious, but you're not required to shoulder its enormity. I think that's part of the reason why I'm making this recording is so that I know that there's other people out here going through the same experience that I am, and that, you're not alone, I'm not alone in this process. This is a human endeavor, but, in a sense, we humans get to be sort of like, some kind of like, representatives of nature, right? When it comes to like interplanetary travel and so on. Maybe that's something that happens in the future of humanity in the next few hundreds of years. But again, that may simply be like indulging too much in my imagination. But I like what Terrance Mckenna said, which is that we live in an age of science and we live in an age of space exploration, or at least we seem to be getting there. You don't need to confront elemental nature every time you open a math book. You're allowed to be small, warm, human, and finite. That's not a failure of courage, it's the natural condition of living. Your nervous system wasn't meant to hold deep space while also trying to debug code. Oh my gosh. You're also allowed to bring your experience back to something gentler and closer to home. I know that one thing that helps me a lot is sitting out in the sun and just sitting there and bathing in those photons and just like, I can look up and understand and accept the fact that the sun is extremely far away, thousands, millions of miles away, however far away it is. And it's here to simply give me some gentle warmth and give me a little bit of energy and life. So that's something that does help me, that grounds me, is just going out and bathing in the sunlight for a little while. You're allowed to bring your experiences back to something gentler and closer to home. If you like, I can help you explore, and then it kind of gives you more suggestions: how to make math feel safe again, how to reduce the existential fear, how to integrate ayahuasca experiences, or simply talk through any of these more deeply. Just tell me what direction you want to go. And so I think I'll wrap up this video here. But again, I wish all of you safe travels. Do take care of yourselves, take care of your mental health, take care of your spiritual health, and let's continue to explore science in the name of human knowledge or in the pursuit of something greater for humanity. Let's continue to do this endeavor, but let's make sure that we're doing it in a safe manner, exactly the way an engineer would design safety metrics when designing something. We psychonauts or cosmonauts or whatever we are, whatever the heck, futurists, fans of Isaac Asimov books, you name it. Let's continue to explore and do it in a safe way. So I wish you well. Thank you for listening, and I hope this was of value to you. And do keep fighting. Keep fighting in the process. And I hope you find that peace that you're looking for. Peace out.